Thank you. First of all, it's a great honor to be on the same panel with the Lord Pickles, Katerina, and Mark. These are the real people doing real job on daily basis, and I would say even on an hourly basis. As a executive vice president and the CEO of the World Jewish Congress, we usually used to say that the most important thing is really the definition, and Ilan Karp spoke about this, and some of my predecessors, and this is exactly what the Albanian parliament did these days. And then, of course, the awareness and reporting, which not always takes place. The third one comes, obviously, the legislation and the security and the law enforcement, which my colleagues are dealing with. And since I'm chairing now also World Door, the largest educational Jewish network, and I used to say it before, and I want to say it once again, the most important thing in my mind in the long run is, of course, education, and the new dimension that we should bring into this discussion is really the online education. We have today the situation while 70 to 80%, sometimes up to 90% of the kids are not attending schools. And most of the information they're getting these days is obviously from the social media, and CAM is working closely on these issues with Facebook and Twitter and other organizations. And I think that more should be given, more attention should be given in this area. So I would say education is the key in the long run, or strategically how to deal with this issue. And the second part is really what the High Representative Moratinos said. We want to see the situation where Albanian parliament and other speakers of the parliament participated today is not a kind of exception. We want to see the situation, like Moratinos said, that 193 countries, member countries of the United Nations, support the efforts that we are just dealing with now. And hopefully, really, this conference leaves me with a feeling of a lot of optimism, hearing it from so many top officials from different places, including from the United Nations.
Well, Katerina, you obviously are dealing front and center with Europe, which is a huge part of this fight. I'm interested in what you're facing now, what you see now as the biggest challenge for Europe in terms of anti-Semitism.
I believe we have to look at Europe in a holistic way and see that what we really need in order to create change, after we've already introduced a lot of tools like the IRA definition, like the appointment of special envoys, like a declaration on European level against anti-Semitism, and also within the European Parliament, what we need really is for this to trickle down and to reach the general public. So our challenge now will be to ensure that through existing structures, through the member states, but also through cities, through different organizations that can have a reach, like, for example, also sports, to the general public, we ensure that there is a growing understanding of how anti-Semitism plays out today and how important it is to counter it in our daily lives. Whenever we hear an anti-Semitic remark or we see something, that we actually stand up. I think this will be the ultimate paradigm change that is needed in order to really change the situation.
Sure, and absolutely.
What we are doing,
yes, go ahead.
Yeah. What we are doing on European level now will be next year a strategy, an EU strategy, a comprehensive one, to look at different aspects on how we can actually ensure that on all levels we play together to reach the general public, and that includes, starting from legislation, but then also aspects of funding, of research, of course, also the aspects that concern the Jewish community, like security, and then as an important aspect, hate speech online,
right,
and addressing also disinformation.
Well, I want to hear more about that in a moment, because, of course, as you say, it is so important that it's not just governments and officials making these changes and these decisions. It does need to also cross over to the public itself. I want to go from that bigger picture of Europe to zoom in for a moment on one key European country, the UK. Lord Pickles, what is the United Kingdom doing these days to fight its own problem of anti-Semitism?
Well, it's a matter of some pride that we were the first to adopt the IRA definition, managing to keep Israel by just a few days. It's really important to understand that adopting the IRA definition is just the beginning. It's not the end of the journey, that it is, by its nature, a working definition, not a working in the sense of waiting for something better to turn up, but working in the sense that it's a practical definition. So the important thing is to move it into local government, into the health service, into the courts, into police enforcement, and to use this system to actually start to triangulate the problem of anti-Semitism. Now, we've done a number of things in the UK to ensure that our Jewish community feels safe. We've put in serious money to ensure that the Jewish community feels safe. But what we need to understand is that the Jewish community plays an important part of being part of the British identity. Without the Jewish community, the British identity would be a lesser thing. It's also important to ensure that that we cooperate internationally on this, and it's important that we not only tackle anti-Semitism, but we confront the BDS problem. It's probably been the most unsuccessful campaign ever, but nevertheless, BDS makes our citizens feel unloved and unwanted and unsafe. And we must ensure that we cooperate to ensure that BDS is seen as what it is, essentially an anti-Semitic organization.
Well, I want to turn it over to Mark. Mark, you've written books, articles, policies. You've really done a lot of studying of the history of anti-Semitism. So I'm curious, from your wealth of knowledge, from the things that you're studying all the time, what would your sort of advice be towards practically fighting anti-Semitism today?
Thanks, Marie. I first of all want to begin by thanking the Combat Anti-Semitism people who organized this incredible conference, as well as to commend the Albanian Prime Minister and Speaker Rucci as well for the adoption of the IRA definition. Having had the privilege of being the person who introduced the definition to IRA and steered it to adoption, I have to say that it's wonderful to see how many people many countries have adopted. It's far exceeded our expectations. And I also want to commend another country, also a smaller country like Albania, Romania in this case, whose late ambassador, Mihnea Constantinescu, was my partner in steering the definition through IRA, and really are showing the power of smaller countries. And you asked about practical application, how smaller countries can model and lead and have larger countries hopefully follow behind. I think one of the things I'm going to suggest, the recognition of the structural elements of anti-Semitism in Western culture, ranging back from the earliest printed books, which include pictures of the blood libel, all the way through to today's social media, where mention was made of the anniversary of the tragic, the second anniversary of the tragic shooting at Pittsburgh 2 years ago, where we already find postings on social media hailing the shooter as a saint. This just coming this week. And it shows how vivid and how strong these images are and how they're transposed into today's world. The ability of anti-Semitism to adjust and fit the current styles of conspiracy theories of Jews as carriers of illness, of the rich Jewish banker, show the adaptability of anti-Semitism to new forms and new tropes, and show how we need to have a background in understanding it historically to apply to today's world practically. And lastly, in this regard, again, Albania has shown a model of a positive Muslim heritage of fighting anti-Semitism in its incredibly brave actions during the Holocaust. But we also have to recognize that both Islam and Christianity have elements of anti-Semitism that have historically played it out, demonstrating, for example, that Jews need to be treated as exiles, permanent exiles, not being eligible for their own homeland as a punishment, or being second-class citizens. And this has led into, along with parts of really an outmoded far-left communist ideology, to the anti-Zionism that we see so prevalent as a form of anti-Semitism today.
Well, Robert, part of what Mark just described so well is how anti-Semitism is adapting. We know that it's taken on different forms, that it's not sort of maybe in the more classic form that most people would recognize. So if you were to sort of pick out, to single out one key thing in the fight against that changing form of anti-Semitism, what might it be?
I would say that, as I said before, if one item should be singled out, it's obviously education. My position in the World Jewish Congress, we had a very successful partnership with UNESCO in many dozens of countries worldwide. So it should be done both on the levels of teachers, of professors in different universities, but more importantly on the level of young students. And as I said, once again, we have to give a special attention to what is happening today online, including online education on these specific issues, history, and like Mark rightly said, we shouldn't deal only with the current events, which are terrible. We have today the situation that there is no single day, a year, that there is no anti-Semitic accident or violence against Jewish person. In Germany, for example, it's every 3 days. So we should deal, obviously we should deal with this, but we have to keep in mind that there is a history to these things, and we should educate young generation about the phenomena and how to deal with this.
Well, Katarina, you mentioned earlier the EU adopting this new executive strategy for how to deal with anti-Semitism. So tell us a little bit more about that. I mean, what is the European Union going to be doing differently from here on out?
Yes, indeed. President von der Leyen confirmed in our State of the Union how important it is to tackle anti-Semitism in a holistic way, and acknowledged also the magnitude of the program, which led to the announcement of this strategy most recently. What we have to change now is in line with what I said before. We have to look at mainstreaming anti-Semitism into the different policy areas. So using the structures that are there, but infuse concrete action against anti-Semitism wherever possible. The German presidency of the EU is currently negotiating a declaration to this end, which means that we'll get the member states on board. And we ourselves can go as European Commission, for example, with regards to campaigns also in the online sector, to use the internet, the structure of the internet also for positive messaging. And we did, for example, a campaign against conspiracy myths, which was called Think Before Sharing, together with the World Jewish Congress and UNESCO on Twitter in July, when we saw that COVID had such an impact on the rise of anti-Semitic hate speech on the net. This is one aspect. So to really see and look into where the EU as an organization can make a difference, the European Commission and European level. But then, of course, we want to support, and we have been doing so already, the member states in their national strategies, and in going, as I said, it needs to trickle down using their structures and their competences with regards to, for example, education, but also security, the training of law enforcement agencies, training of teachers, and ensure that they are equipped with the necessary tools, and they don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we can offer the exchange of best practices to them. And then I believe we need to use also the societal structures. For example, Bavaria, one region of Germany, has recently sent the IRA definition to about 400 NGOs, saying, look at this definition. When addressing anti-Semitism in a public debate and also with your members, you should be aware of this definition and you should adopt it. And there has been a lot of positive reaction from from societies which were, general societies and clubs that reached out to the general public. So all these aspects will be part of the strategy.
Lord Pickles, as Katerina just mentioned, the issue of online anti-Semitism, we have seen that rise during the COVID-19 pandemic, something which really mirrors what we've seen decades and decades ago, again, in other similar cases of sort of global health scares. How concerned are you about the issue of online anti-Semitism? And maybe more specifically, how confident are you in nations' abilities to actually deal with it?
I'm very worried, and it's not just been in the Jewish community, it's been Chinese and Muslim community that have had various lies told about them, suggesting that they were responsible for the spread of vaccine, of the virus. And I think it is important. We've got a bill coming before our Parliament, the online, which will create a duty on the providers of the internet service, of the social media, of having a duty of care. That should be on the floor of the House of Commons at the turn of the year. I think we need to really understand with the IRA definition that it actually does deal with a modern form of anti-Semitism, and that it looks at the way in which we treat our Jewish citizens, in particular, the various examples that are given in the IRA definition, in a way that the examples are the point, that you can't really adopt the IRA definition unless you adopt the examples. And they go to the very heart of what modern anti-Semitism, trying to suggest that Jewish people are somehow have a dual loyalty, that the loyalty to Israel is greater, suggesting that somehow that they're a fifth column inside society. It's immensely important that we are robust in tackling this. It's immensely important that we clearly demonstrate that anti-Semitism is something to be defeated. I am not interested in trying just to push back on anti-Semitism. I think our aim should be to completely and utterly destroy it, because it acts as a cancer inside society that goes way beyond the Jewish community.
Well, I mean, so important what you're saying, that online the lines are even more blurred. I mean, the lines between what is anti-Semitism and what is not. And that is something that so many nations are trying to navigate right now. So maybe before we conclude, Mark, I want to come back to you. I know that you have testified to U.S. Congress. You've met with world leaders. What might your message be to Balkan nations that are all gathered here today for this historic event and looking to step up their commitment, their involvement against anti-Semitism?
Well, I think I would begin by saying the need and the necessity for strong political leadership, and we've seen it demonstrated here already, but it certainly applies not just to the Balkans, but every place. My friend, Dr. Ahmed Shahid, the UN Special Rapporteur for Religious Freedom, and I believe issued a landmark report to the General Assembly last fall on anti-Semitism, in which he described anti-Semitism as being toxic to democracy. I think he's quite right about that. Anti-Semitism really threatens to undermine every aspect of human rights and democratic rule, and is a challenge that transcends, not just or applies not just to the Jewish community, but the threat applies to everybody. So I think that one thing is the strength of political leadership, but at the same time, I would caution and say anti-Semitism should never become a political football. It should never be used for political purposes, meaning that anti-Semitism on the right needs to be called out by people on the right, not just on the left, and on the left, it needs to be called out by people from the left, not just on the right. Otherwise, it becomes an exercise in finger pointing for political gain. And we really need the bipartisanship that this whole effort that Combat Hate is expressing. I'm glad through the work I do at the Simon Wiesenthal Center that we've been able to work with government officials across the border on all sides of the political divide. We've been able to work with Facebook, with Google and Twitter and those companies, and we've finally seen some action in that, which is perhaps very late in the game, but still offers hopefully a way forward to dealing with the online issue. And the last thing I would say is that, again, we need to remember history, not to whitewash it, not to allow history to become a political tool as well. If it was the Holocaust, countries should not hide behind comfortable myths, but should recognize the contribution of collaboration that happened, and not use and distort the history of the Holocaust for political purposes as well.